The forgotten town of Elmridge, Kansas sits like a scar on the prairie landscape. In 1867, it was a place of promise, a frontier settlement where science and progress were meant to flourish alongside the wheat fields and cattle ranches. Today, it's barely a footnote in county records, its legacy buried beneath decades of deliberate silence. According to the Elmridge Medical Society ledger, 37 men volunteered for what was called the Progressive Mind Initiative. Only 16 were ever seen again. The others vanished from official records, their names redacted from census documents, their properties mysteriously reassigned, their existence systematically erased. Recently discovered correspondence between Elmridge's founding physician Dr. Walter Harmon and members of the prestigious Eastern Scientific Coalition reveals a disturbing truth. These letters, sealed in a metal box and buried beneath the floorboards of the old town hall for over 150 years, tell a story that challenges our understanding of America's scientific awakening. Are you brave enough to learn what happened when four brothers stood against the tide of progress? This isn't a tale of superstition confronting reason. It's something far more disturbing. A story of how reason itself, divorced from humanity, becomes the most dangerous superstition of all. The winter of 1867 was particularly harsh in Kansas. Snow blanketed the plains, isolating Elmridge from neighboring settlements for weeks at a time. The howling wind created ghostly whistles through the newly constructed buildings, most prominent among them the Elmridge Institute of Scientific Progress. A stark, three-story structure of red brick and narrow windows that loomed over the town like a sentinel. Dr. Walter Harmon had arrived from Boston the previous spring, bringing with him credentials from the finest medical schools and promises of transforming this frontier outpost into a beacon of scientific advancement. Tall and severe, with a meticulously trimmed beard, Harmon spoke with the confidence of a man who believed science could, and should, remake mankind in a more perfect image. "The human mind remains our final frontier," he would proclaim at town meetings. "If we can understand it, map it, and ultimately control its deficiencies, we can eliminate the weakness that plagues mankind." The townspeople were largely impressed. In this post-Civil War era, with memories of bloodshed still fresh, the promise of a new, more rational society held powerful appeal. The town council quickly approved funding for Harmon's institute, and construction was completed with remarkable speed. By autumn, Harmon had assembled a team of 6 assistants, young men with medical training who shared his vision. They began recruiting volunteers from the community for what they described as progressive studies of mental function and improvement. The first participants were mostly drifters and laborers seeking the modest payment offered. But as winter approached and farm work dwindled, local men began to sign up. Among them were the 4 Sullivan brothers, Thomas, James, William, and Robert, sons of Irish immigrants who had settled in Kansas before the war. Their farm sat 3 miles east of town, isolated but productive. Unlike many of their neighbors, the Sullivans had prospered, their land yielding abundant harvests of wheat and corn. Thomas, the eldest at 32, was known throughout the county for his innovative farming techniques. James, 2 years younger, had served as a Union Army medic and returned with an interest in medicine that caught Dr. Harmon's attention. William, 27, was the mechanical genius who designed irrigation systems that neighboring farms soon copied. Robert, the youngest at 23, was quieter than his brothers, but possessed a memory that townsfolk described as unnatural. He could recite entire books after a single reading. The Sullivan brothers represent the finest stock this community has to offer. Dr. Harmon wrote to his colleagues back east, particularly the youngest, whose cognitive abilities suggest untapped potential in the human brain. "I have convinced all 4 to participate in our studies." What Harmon didn't mention in his correspondence was how exactly he had secured their participation. The truth would only emerge later, through the diary of Sarah Sullivan, Thomas's wife, who wrote of strange promises made. Dr. Harmon spoke of new techniques to expand the mind's capabilities. James was eager, and where one brother goes, the others follow. But Thomas was hesitant until the doctor promised treatments for my headaches. 3 years I've suffered, and conventional medicine has failed me. The brothers began visiting the institute twice weekly. At first, the sessions seemed benign. Memory tests, mathematical problems, reaction studies. Dr. Harmon's assistants took meticulous notes, measuring everything from the brothers' pulse rates to the dilation of their pupils. Martha Jenkins, who cleaned the institute twice weekly, was perhaps the first to notice something amiss. The daughter of former slaves who had settled in Kansas after emancipation, Martha was largely invisible to the institute's staff, a common occurrence for black women in white establishments of that era. This invisibility allowed her to observe without being observed. "I saw them leading William Sullivan to the basement," she later told the town sheriff. "He walked like a man in a dream, eyes open but not seeing. When I dusted the laboratory the next morning, there was a strange smell, like burnt metal and something else I can't name, and stains on the floor that weren't there before." The sheriff dismissed her concerns. "Science has its own ways," he said. "It's not for us simple folk to understand." But Martha couldn't shake what she had seen. She began paying closer attention, noting which men entered the institute and which ones returned. Some emerged seemingly unchanged. Others walked differently, spoke differently, as if something essential had been carved away. "The Jenkins woman is becoming problematic," Dr. Harmon wrote in his private journal. "She asks too many questions about our procedures. I've instructed the staff to limit her access to the main floor only." By December, changes in the Sullivan brothers became noticeable to the community. James, once sociable and quick to laugh, grew withdrawn. William complained of headaches and memory lapses. Thomas began having tremors in his right hand. Only Robert seemed unchanged, or perhaps even enhanced. His already remarkable memory improved further, and he displayed mathematical abilities far beyond his previous capabilities. "The divergent results in the Sullivan subjects are fascinating," Harmon recorded. 3 show the expected degradation pattern following the procedure, but the youngest demonstrates the enhancement effect we've theorized. "I've requested permission from the coalition to intensify the protocol for Subject R." Sarah Sullivan's diary entries grew increasingly desperate. "Thomas doesn't know me some mornings. He stares at me like I'm a stranger in his home. James barely speaks anymore. William can't remember how to harness the horses, tasks he's done since childhood. Only Robert seems himself, yet even he has changed. There's a coldness in him now, a distance. He studies us all like we're insects pinned to a board." The breaking point came during a blizzard in late January. Robert Sullivan appeared at Sheriff Taylor's door near midnight, his clothes covered in snow, his eyes wild with fear. "They're not fixing us," he gasped. "They're emptying us, taking pieces of our minds and putting something else back in. I've seen what they keep in the basement. I've seen where our thoughts go." Sheriff Taylor was a practical man who had little patience for fantastical claims. He'd fought at Antietam and seen enough real horrors to last a lifetime. Yet something in Robert Sullivan's eyes, a lucidity amidst the terror, gave him pause. "Slow down, boy," he said, ushering Robert to a chair by the fire. "What exactly did you see?" "Jars," Robert whispered, his hands shaking violently despite the warmth of the sheriff's office. "Glass jars with pieces floating in them, and notebooks, hundreds of them, with drawings of the human brain. They've mapped it, Sheriff. They've found ways to extract what makes us, us." The sheriff poured Robert a whiskey, which the young man drank in a single swallow. "They keep records of everything," Robert continued. "Each procedure, each extraction. They call it cognitive harvesting. They're taking specific abilities from some subjects and trying to implant them in others." "That's impossible," Sheriff Taylor muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. 3 weeks ago, I could recite anything I read, but I couldn't calculate complex equations in my head, Robert said. Now I can solve problems that would take a mathematics professor hours to work through. And I know exactly whose ability I have. There was a professor from Lawrence who volunteered. He hasn't been seen since. The sheriff's expression darkened. And your brothers? Thomas's agricultural knowledge is gone, harvested. James can't remember a thing about medicine. William's mechanical aptitude has vanished. They're like empty vessels. Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. And they're not the only ones. There are others, people from town who don't even remember who they used to be. Sheriff Taylor sat heavily in his chair, the weight of Robert's words settling on him like a physical burden. If what you're saying is true, it is, Robert interrupted. And there's more. They're planning something bigger. Dr. Harmon talks about cognitive purification, selecting the most valuable mental traits and eliminating the rest. He believes he can create perfect minds. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Snow piling against the windows like nature itself was trying to isolate them from the world. The sheriff stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking again. We need proof, Robert. No one will believe such claims without evidence. I've been collecting it, Robert replied, reaching into his coat to produce a small leather-bound journal. I've documented everything, dates, procedures, changes in my brothers and the other subjects, and I've mapped the institute. I know where they keep their records, their specimens. I know which floorboards creak and which doors are left unlocked. The sheriff leafed through the journal, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Detailed notes on brain structure, diagrams of surgical tools, lists of subjects and their harvested qualities. Most disturbing were Robert's observations of his own brothers, daily records of their deterioration, clinical yet heartbreaking in their precision. Why are you still yourself? The sheriff asked finally. If they've done this to the others. Robert's eyes clouded. I'm not entirely myself. They've been treating me differently, enhancing rather than extracting. Dr. Harmon calls me his proof of concept. He believes I demonstrate the possibility of cognitive advancement through targeted acquisition. In plain English, boy, he's building me into something new, Robert said simply. Something beyond human. And once he perfects the technique, he plans to apply it to powerful men across the country. Senators, industrialists, military leaders, all remade according to his vision of intellectual perfection. The sheriff closed the journal with a snap. We need to get your brothers out, tonight. It's too late for them, Robert said, his voice breaking for the first time. What's been taken can't be restored, but we can stop this before it spreads. We can expose what Harmon is doing. As they formulated their plan, neither man noticed the figure watching through the frosted window, Dr. Harmon's youngest assistant, Edwin Porter, who had followed Robert's tracks through the snow. By dawn, the blizzard had abated enough for Sheriff Taylor and Robert to make their way to the Sullivan farm. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. Sarah Sullivan sat alone at the kitchen table, staring vacantly at the wall. She didn't acknowledge their presence, didn't blink, didn't seem to breathe until Robert gently touched her shoulder. They came for Thomas last night, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. They said he needed urgent treatment. James and William went with them. They walked like sleepwalkers, obeying without question. Robert knelt before his sister-in-law, taking her cold hands in his. Sarah, we're going to stop this. But I need to know. Did they say anything else? Did they leave any message? Sarah's vacant expression suddenly sharpened, her eyes focusing on Robert with unexpected intensity. Dr. Harmon said to tell you that resistance is a cognitive defect that can be corrected. He said your brothers are being prepared for the final phase and that you should return to complete what you started. The sheriff drew his revolver, checking that it was loaded. We need more men. I'll deputize some townspeople. No, Robert interrupted. The town council supports Harmon. The mayor's son was one of the first volunteers, and he returned, changed, more compliant, more aligned with Harmon's vision. "We can't trust anyone. Then it's just us," the sheriff said grimly. "Not quite," came a voice from the doorway. Martha Jenkins stood there, snow dusting her shoulders. "I've been watching that place for months. I know when the guards change, which windows don't latch properly, where they keep the keys." Sheriff Taylor looked at her skeptically. "This isn't women's business, Martha." "They took my brother last week," she replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "He went in for a cognitive assessment and came out unable to recognize his own children. This is everyone's business, Sheriff." As they huddled around the kitchen table, formulating their plan, the quiet of the morning was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Through the window they saw Dr. Harmon himself, accompanied by 2 assistants and the mayor, riding toward the farm. "They know," Robert whispered. "Porter must have reported back." "The cellar," Sarah said suddenly, animation returning to her face. "There's a tunnel Thomas dug during the war, a hidden route to the creek bed. We can escape that way." As Harmon's party dismounted outside, the 4 conspirators slipped into the cellar. Sarah lifted a false floor beneath the potato bin, revealing a narrow earthen passage barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. "Go," she urged them. "I'll delay them." "Sarah," Robert began. "They've already taken everything from me." She cut him off. "This is all I can do now. Get to the institute while it's understaffed. Find the evidence. Stop them." The last thing Robert saw as he entered the tunnel was Sarah calmly ascending the cellar stairs, her face set with quiet determination. The tunnel was a cramped nightmare, barely wider than Sheriff Taylor's shoulders, with roots dangling from the ceiling and the constant threat of collapse looming over them. They crawled in single file, Robert leading the way, Martha in the middle, and the sheriff bringing up the rear. "Thomas dug this during the war," the sheriff whispered, his breath visible in the cold darkness. "After Quantrill's raiders burned Lawrence," Robert explained, "he feared they might come this far west. The tunnel was his insurance. It took nearly an hour to traverse the passage. When they finally emerged, they found themselves in a dry creek bed, half a mile from the Sullivan farm, concealed by a thicket of winter-bare cottonwoods. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of the farmhouse. "What do you think happened to Sarah?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. Robert's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed his anguish. "She bought us time. That's all that matters now." And they made their way toward Elmridge using natural cover where possible, avoiding the main roads. The institute loomed against the gray winter sky, its windows like blank eyes staring out over the town. As Martha had predicted, the building was largely empty, most of the staff having accompanied Dr. Harmon to the Sullivan farm. "There should be only 2 assistants remaining," Martha whispered as they crouched behind the stable. "Porter and Miller. They'll be in the laboratory on the 2nd floor." "And the basement?" Robert asked. "That's where they keep the subjects after procedures. It's always locked." Sheriff Taylor checked his revolver one final time. "I'll handle the assistants. You 2 find the evidence and locate the Sullivan brothers." They entered through the kitchen at the rear of the building. The silence inside was oppressive. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty structure, but the heavy stillness of a place where terrible things happen behind closed doors. They moved carefully through the 1st floor, past examination rooms with their gleaming instruments and leather restraint straps. At the main staircase, they separated, the sheriff ascending to the 2nd floor while Robert and Martha sought the basement entrance. They found it behind a heavy oak door in the rear hallway, secured with an iron padlock. "I've never been allowed down there," Martha whispered, "but I've seen them carry specimens in glass containers through this door." Robert examined the lock. "We need the key." "Or something better," Martha replied, producing a small metal tool from her pocket. "My father was a locksmith before the war. He taught me his trade, though most white folks wouldn't hire a colored woman to work on their locks. Her fingers worked with practiced precision, and within moments the padlock clicked open. Robert gave her a look of newfound respect before they carefully descended the narrow stairs. The basement was illuminated by gas lamps that cast long, distorted shadows across the stone floor. The first room contained filing cabinets and bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Robert quickly scanned the labels. Cognitive extraction protocols, subject outcomes, transference methodologies. Here, he said, pulling out a ledger. This has all the names, everyone who's been through their procedures. Martha was examining a large map pinned to the wall. Robert, look at this. It was a map of the United States with red pins marking dozens of locations: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Chicago, San Francisco. Expansion sites, Robert read from the notation at the bottom. They're planning to spread this across the country. A small notebook lay open on the desk beneath the map. Martha picked it up, her eyes widening as she read. These are telegrams, communications with powerful men in these cities, senators, university presidents, hospital directors. They've already secured funding and facilities. Take everything, Robert said grimly. Every piece of evidence. As Martha gathered documents, Robert continued deeper into the basement. The next room froze his blood. Glass jars lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each containing what appeared to be segments of preserved brain tissue. Each jar was meticulously labeled with a name, date, and notation of the cognitive function harvested. He found his brothers' names among them: Thomas Sullivan, Agricultural Innovation Capacity; James Sullivan, Medical Intuition; William Sullivan, Mechanical Comprehension. Fighting nausea, Robert forced himself to continue to the final room. Here, the true horror revealed itself. A dozen men lay on narrow cots, some restrained, others so vacant they needed no restraints. They stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, occasionally making small, purposeless movements with their hands. Among them were Thomas, James, and William, or rather, the hollow shells that had once been his brothers. Robert approached them, kneeling between their cots. Thomas's eyes flickered toward him without recognition. James didn't react at all. William made a soft, animal sound deep in his throat. "I'm going to make this right," Robert whispered, knowing they couldn't understand him. "I promise you." A sudden commotion from upstairs, shouting, then a gunshot, told him their time was running out. He returned to the document room where Martha was stuffing papers into a canvas bag. "We need to go," he urged. "The sheriff may be in trouble." They hurried up the stairs to find Sheriff Taylor engaged in a desperate struggle with Porter, while Miller lay unconscious, or worse, on the floor. The sheriff had a bleeding wound on his temple, but managed to subdue Porter with a final crushing blow. "Harmon is returning," Taylor gasped. "Someone in town must have alerted him. We have perhaps 10 minutes. "We have what we need," Robert said, indicating the bag of evidence. "But my brothers, all those men down there, we can't leave them." The sheriff's face hardened. "We can't move them all. We can't just abandon them. If we're captured, no one will ever know what happened here," the sheriff countered. "The evidence must get out, Robert. It's the only way to stop this from spreading." The agonizing choice hung between them until Martha spoke softly. "There's a storage room off the kitchen with chemical supplies. I've seen jars of kerosene, cleaning spirits, medical alcohols." The implication was clear. Robert closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Help me get my brothers out first. Then we'll make sure no one else suffers in this place." They managed to carry the 3 Sullivan brothers to a wagon behind the institute. The other patients were too numerous to move in the time they had left. Working quickly, they spread flammable liquids throughout the building, focusing on the research materials they couldn't carry and the horrific specimen room. As they fled toward the county line, flames began to engulf the Elmridge Institute. They didn't look back. Within days, the Eastern Scientific Coalition dispatched representatives to investigate the fire. They found nothing but ashes, Dr. Harmon and his assistants had vanished, taking whatever remaining records they possessed. The town council, many of whom had family members among the test subjects, voted to officially record the incident as an accidental fire that claimed no lives. Sheriff Taylor was found dead in his office a week later, an apparent suicide, though the bullet wound was in an unusual position for a self-inflicted shot. Martha Jenkins disappeared, reportedly heading west on a wagon train. Robert Sullivan and his 3 brothers reached Colorado Territory, where they lived in isolation on a small homestead. Robert cared for his siblings until their deaths some years later, documenting their condition in journals that remained undiscovered until 2023, when a historical preservation project unearthed them from the ruins of an abandoned cabin. As for Dr. Harmon and his Progressive Mind initiative, no official record acknowledges their existence. Yet, in the decades that followed, similar institutes appeared briefly in cities across America, always operating for just a few years before closing amid vague rumors of unethical practices. Their records, if they exist at all, remain sealed in private archives, the truth of their work erased from history. Perhaps some darkness is too profound for society to face, some science too terrible to acknowledge. But in the forgotten stories of those who resisted, like 4 brothers from Kansas who defied the cutting edge of their age, we find warnings that echo through time. When knowledge outpaces conscience, humanity itself becomes the final experiment.